The first rays of dawn sliced through the thin curtains of Grace Harlan's weathered kitchen, casting long shadows across the cracked linoleum floor. Outside, in the quiet outskirts of Willow Creek, a fierce wind howled like a distant wolf, rattling the loose shingles on her sagging roof. Grace, a woman in her late 50s with silver streaks threading her auburn hair, stood at the counter, her hands trembling as she poured steaming coffee into a row of mismatched mugs. The aroma filled the air, rich and comforting, a ritual she'd kept for over a decade. But this morning, something was different. A sharp crack echoed from above, followed by a cascade of dust and debris tumbling down the hallway. The old house, her only companion since her husband passed 5 years ago, was finally giving way. Plaster crumbled from the ceiling, burying her faded photographs in a grey haze. Grace froze, heart pounding, as a beam groaned ominously, threatening to collapse the entire structure around her fragile world. She'd built this place with Tom, back when life felt unbreakable, nailing boards under the summer sun, laughing over dreams of a family that never quite came. Now, alone, she poured coffee for the Iron Riders, the motorcycle club that thundered through town every morning on their way to the open road. It started as a whim, a widow's kindness to the leather-clad strangers who nodded politely at her porch. Day after day, rain or shine, she'd set out the pot and mugs, no charge, no questions. "Fuel for the journey," she'd say with a weary smile, watching them rev their engines and disappear into the horizon. They called her Mama G, a title that warmed her more than she admitted. But lately, the house had been whispering warnings, leaks turning to floods, walls bowing like tired shoulders. Bills piled up, unspoken debts to a town that had forgotten her sacrifices. This morning, as the ceiling buckled further, Grace realized she couldn't ignore it anymore. The wind picked up, slamming against the windows like an accusation, and she whispered a prayer, wondering if her quiet acts of generosity would ever be repaid. Miles away, on the dusty edge of town where the highway met the scrubland, Ethan Hawk Riley gripped the handlebars of his vintage Harley, the engine's low rumble vibrating through his bones. At 42, Hawk carried the weight of old wars in his scarred knuckles and the faded tattoo of a promise inked on his forearm. Loyalty above all. He'd lost his brother in a desert skirmish years back, a bond forged in fire that left him wandering with the Iron Riders, a brotherhood of outcasts turned family. They weren't the villains the whispers painted, ex-soldiers, mechanics, fathers seeking purpose. Hawk led them now, after the founder stepped back, his decisions guided by an unyielding code. Honor the small promises, stand for the overlooked. As the convoy assembled, 24 bikes gleaming under the sodium lights of their roadside meetup, Hawk's second-in-command, a burly veteran named Lucas, pulled up beside him. "Heard about Mama G's place," Lucas said, voice gravelly over the idling motors. "Folks say it's one storm from caving in. She's been good to us, Hawk. Real good." Hawk nodded, the leather of his vest creaking. He'd sipped her coffee countless times, exchanged nods that spoke volumes in their silence. Grace never asked for stories, but her eyes held the kind of quiet strength that reminded him of home, lost but enduring. The club had their rituals, rides for fallen comrades, hands extended to strangers in need. But this felt personal, a debt woven into the fabric of their mornings. As the sun crested the hills, painting the sky in hues of gold and crimson, Hawk raised a gloved fist. "Brothers," he called, his voice cutting through the pack like a blade. "We ride for more than the road today. Mama G's given us her heart in every cup. Time we give back." Engines roared to life, a symphony of thunder that shook the earth, and the convoy surged forward, dust swirling in their wake like a promise unleashed. They arrived at Grace's just as the dawn chorus of birds broke the silence, their bikes forming a steel perimeter around the trembling house. Grace stepped onto the porch, wiping dust from her apron, her eyes widening at the sight. 24 riders dismounting in unison, tools clanking from saddlebags, faces set with determination. Hawk approached first, removing his helmet to reveal a face etched with quiet resolve, wind-tousled hair catching the light. "Morning. Mama G," he said, his tone steady as the horizon. "Coffee smells better than ever, but we ain't here for that today." She blinked, confusion mingling with a flicker of hope, as Lucas and the others unloaded hammers, lumber, and tarps from a trailing truck they'd commandeered. The air hummed with activity, the scent of fresh pine mixing with engine oil, the metallic tang of dew on metal. What followed was a blur of motion, captured in the mind's eye like a slow-motion reel. Riders scaling the roof with the precision of soldiers breaching a line, nails driven home with rhythmic thuds that echoed like heartbeats. Grace watched from the porch, a mug clutched in her hands as Hawk knelt beside her. "You kept us going all these years," he murmured, glancing at the horizon, where the sun now burned bright. "A promise ain't just words. It's action when it counts." She nodded, tears tracing paths through the dust on her cheeks, the weight of isolation lifting like morning fog. The club worked without complaint, shirt sleeves rolled up against the warming air, laughter punctuating the labor as old jokes flew between swings of the hammer. By mid-morning, the sagging roof stood firm, beams reinforced, walls patched with care that spoke of deeper loyalties. But as the dust settled and the first coats of paint dried under the climbing sun, Hawk gathered his riders for a quiet word. This wasn't just a fix, it was a reckoning. Whispers in town hinted at shady developers eyeing Grace's land, pressuring her with veiled threats to sell cheap. The Iron Riders had heard enough. Their code demanded more than repairs. "We stand with her," Hawk declared, eyes scanning the group, each man nodding in solemn agreement. Grace, overhearing, placed a hand on his arm, her voice soft but ironclad. "You've given me back my home, Ethan, but why?" He met her gaze, the desert wind whispering through the newly shored eaves. "Because promises like yours don't fade, they ride on." The day stretched on, the rebuild transforming into a vigil. Neighbors peeked from curtains, drawn by the unexpected symphony of brotherhood in action. Grace served lunch from her salvaged kitchen, sandwiches and that endless coffee, fueling the crew as stories emerged in fragments. Hawk's lost brother, Lucas's scars from the same forgotten war, the club's oath to protect the vulnerable. By afternoon, the house gleamed like new, a beacon against the relentless sky. Yet tension simmered beneath the triumph. Word came via a club scout that the developers' men were circling, their influence tangled in local strings. Hawk's jaw tightened, the glint of resolve in his eyes, promising that this act of kindness was only the beginning, a spark that would ignite a larger fire of justice. As evening shadows lengthened, the riders mounted up once more, engines purring low. Grace stood in her doorway, the porch light flickering on early, illuminating faces she'd come to know beyond the leather. "Come back tomorrow," she said. Not a plea, but a statement. Hawk revved his bike, the convoy a wall of chrome and loyalty. "Every day, Mama G, every day." They rode out as they came, a thunder that faded into promise, leaving behind not just a house, but a family forged in the quiet hours before dawn. The moon hung low over Willow Creek that night, a silver sentinel casting pale light on the freshly mended roof of Grace Harlan's home. Inside, the air still carried the faint scent of sawdust and fresh paint, mingling with the ever-present aroma of brewed coffee that seemed to seep into every corner of her life. Grace sat at the scarred oak table, her fingers tracing the edge of a mug, long gone cold. The events of the day replaying in her mind like scenes from a dream she wasn't ready to wake from. The Iron Riders had come like a storm, fierce, unyielding, and left her world upright again. But as the clock ticked past midnight, An unease settled in her chest, heavier than the dust that had fallen from her ceiling just hours before. Outside, the wind had died to a whisper, but shadows moved in the scrubland beyond her yard, hints of eyes watching from the dark. Across town, in the dim glow of the Iron Riders' makeshift clubhouse, a converted warehouse on the edge of the industrial sprawl, Ethan Hawk Riley leaned against a workbench cluttered with engine parts and half-empty beer bottles. The space hummed with the low murmur of voices, the clink of tools being set down after a long day. Hawk's leather vest hung open, revealing the faded ink of his tattoo, a reminder of battles fought and oaths sworn. Lucas, his second-in-command, paced nearby, broad shoulders tense under the harsh fluorescent lights. "Those developers ain't gonna let this slide, Hawk," Lucas said, his voice a low rumble that cut through the quiet. Words already spreading. They think Mama G's land is prime for their strip mall dream, cheap buyout, no questions. Hawk's eyes narrowed, the lines on his face deepening like cracks in parched earth. He'd seen men like them before, suits with polished shoes and hollow promises, preying on the forgotten corners of the world. The club had gathered in full force now, 24 riders, sprawled on crates and stools, their faces illuminated by the flicker of a single lantern. Stories flowed like the coffee Grace served, tales of lost comrades, roads that led nowhere, the quiet code that bound them tighter than blood. Hawk stood, his presence commanding silence without a word. "She gave us more than coffee," he began, his tone steady, carrying the weight of unspoken grief. "Every morning, when the world's still dark and we're chasing ghosts, Mama G lit a fire in us. A promise kept, day in, day out. Now those land grabbers want to bury her under concrete. We don't ride away from that." Nods rippled through the group, fists clenching in quiet agreement. Among them was Noah, a wiry mechanic with a prosthetic leg from the same war that had scarred Hawk, and Sarah, the club's lone female rider, a nurse who'd traded scrubs for leathers after losing her own family to neglect. They weren't outlaws, they were guardians, piecing together a justice the system overlooked. Dawn broke with a vengeance the next morning, the sun piercing the horizon like a blade, turning the dew-kissed fields into fields of gold. Grace rose early, as always, the habit ingrained deeper than any wound. She filled the pot, the rich steam curling upward like a signal flare, and stepped onto the porch that now felt solid under her feet. The rebuild had worked wonders, the walls straight, the roof unyielding, but sleep had evaded her, haunted by a late-night knock she'd ignored. A man in a crisp suit, badge glinting falsely, had left a card, "Relocation services for your safety." Her hands shook as she poured the first mugs, the ceramic warm against her palms, the distant roar of engines approaching like thunder on the breeze. The Iron Riders arrived in formation, their bikes a gleaming convoy slicing through the morning mist. Hawk dismounted first, his boots crunching on the gravel path, helmet tucked under his arm. Grace met his gaze, her smile fragile but genuine. "Coffee's ready," she said, voice soft as the rising light. He took a mug, the steam rising between them, and nodded toward the horizon. "We ain't leaving you to face this alone, Mama G. Heard about the visitors last night?" Her eyes widened. The weight of secrets she'd kept spilling out in a rush, the letters, the calls, the veiled threats from men who claimed her land was a hazard waiting to happen. Hawk listened, his jaw set like forged steel, the club's code igniting in his chest. Loyalty wasn't a word, it was the engine that drove them forward. As the riders fueled up, word spread through their ranks like wildfire. Lucas coordinated from his bike, phone pressed to his ear, rallying contacts from the old days, veterans turned lawyers, mechanics with ties to the county board. Noah knelt by the porch steps, inspecting the foundation with a practiced eye, while Sarah helped Grace inside, her steady hands folding linens as they talked of losses shared. "We choose our fights," Sarah murmured, glancing out the window at the assembling crew. "And our family." Outside, the air thickened with purpose. The scent of hot metal from idling engines, the earthy tang of turned soil, as a few riders began reinforcing the fence line, unasked but inevitable. By mid-morning, the first signs of opposition appeared. A black SUV crawling down the dirt road, windows tinted like secrets. It slowed at the edge of Grace's property, the driver, a sharp-faced man in sunglasses, stepping out with a clipboard in hand. Hawk strode forward, the club fanning out behind him like a shield wall, their presence a silent roar louder than any engine. "This land's not for sale," Hawk said, his voice carrying clear across the yard, no threat in his tone but unyielding truth. The man smirked, flipping through papers. "Code violations, ma'am," he called to Grace, who stood flanked by Sarah and Lucas. "Your house, it's a risk. Sign here and we'll handle the rest." Grace's chin lifted, the morning sun catching the silver in her hair. "This is my home. Built it with my hands, kept it with my heart. You don't get to take that." Tension coiled like a spring, the air humming with unspoken stakes. The man hesitated, eyes flicking over the wall of leather and resolve, then retreated to his vehicle, tires kicking up dust as he sped away. But Hawk knew it wasn't over. These types didn't fold easy. He turned to Grace, placing a hand on her shoulder, the gesture light but loaded with promise. "We've got your back, all the way." She nodded, tears unshed, the coffee pot refilled, as if to seal the pact. The riders worked on, shoring up outbuildings, planting stakes in the metaphorical ground, their laughter a defiant counterpoint to the gathering clouds on the horizon. As the sun climbed higher, casting long shadows that danced like allies, whispers of a larger plan emerged. The developers had pull, friends in high places, strings pulled from City Hall. Hawk gathered his core team in the shade of an old oak, maps spread on a tailgate. "We expose them," he said, finger-tracing routes that led to records, witnesses, truths buried under bureaucracy. Noah grinned, tools in hand. Time to ride for justice, not just the road. Grace watched from the porch, the house no longer a fragile shell but a fortress, her quiet generosity blooming into something unbreakable. The day waned with the club, lingering longer than usual, sharing a meal under the eaves, simple fare, but rich in camaraderie. Engines idled low as dusk painted the sky in bruised purples, a vigil against the encroaching night. Hawk mounted up last, his eyes meeting Grace's in a nod that spoke volumes. "Tomorrow, we push back harder." She waved them off, the convoy's thunder fading into the twilight, leaving her with a warmth that chased away the chill. But in the quiet that followed, a single headlight pierced the dark, a scout from the opposition, circling like a predator. Grace locked the door, heart steady now, knowing the promise of the Iron Riders rode with her. And now, I invite you to leave in the comments where you're watching from and the exact hour you heard this story. We wish to know how far these northern confessions travel and at what moments they reach you. The stars wheeled overhead in Willow Creek's vast night sky, pinpricks of light that seemed indifferent to the drama unfolding below. Grace Harlan bolted the door with a firm click, the sound echoing through the now sturdy frame of her home like a declaration of defiance. Inside, the kitchen glowed softly from a single bulb, casting warm pools of light on the counter where the coffee pot still simmered, its rich, earthy scent a steadfast anchor amid the uncertainty. She leaned against the wood, listening to the faint crunch of gravel outside, the lone motorcycle circling her property like a shadow with intent. It wasn't the comforting thunder of the Iron Riders. This was something colder, more calculated. Her pulse quickened, memories of Tom's steady presence flooding back, the way he'd patrol their land at dusk with nothing but a flashlight and unshakable resolve. Now, Alone but no longer truly so, Grace drew a breath, the air thick with the lingering tang of fresh lumber and resolve. Miles away, in the Iron Rider's warehouse clubhouse, the air hung heavy with the acrid bite of cigarette smoke and motor oil, the kind that clung to clothes like old regrets. Ethan Hawk Riley stood at the center of the room, a map of the county spread across a scarred table, illuminated by the harsh glare of overhead lamps. His fingers traced faded lines, routes to the developers' offices, back alleys where whispers of corruption echoed. Lucas hovered nearby, arms crossed over his broad chest, the scar on his jaw catching the light like a badge of battles past. "That scout was one of theirs," Lucas growled, his voice low and edged with gravel. "Spotted him earlier, tailing our ride out. They're testing us, Hawk, seeing if we'll blink." Hawk's eyes, sharp as flint, met his second's gaze. The tattoo on his forearm itched faintly, a reminder of the promise inked there after his brother's fall, loyalty that didn't bend, no matter the storm. The club had swelled that night, riders filtering in from side jobs and solitary runs, their boots thudding against the concrete floor like a gathering drumbeat. Noah, the wiry mechanic, with his prosthetic leg propped on a crate, sketched quick diagrams of the developers' holdings, warehouses on the edge of town, rumored to hide dealings that skirted every moral line. Sarah, her leather jacket slung over a chair, poured coffee from a thermos she'd snagged from Grace's that morning, the steam rising like a veil over the group's faces. "She's tougher than she lets on," Sarah said, handing a mug to Hawk, her voice steady with the quiet authority of someone who'd mended more than bodies in her nursing days. "But those suits, they play dirty. Intimidation wrapped in paperwork. We need proof, not just muscle." Nods rippled through the assembly, faces etched with the shared weight of chosen kin, bonds forged not in blood but in the fire of standing firm. Hawk straightened, his presence drawing all eyes, the room falling silent save for the distant hum of a cooling engine outside. "Mama G didn't just give us coffee," he said, his words measured, carrying the rhythm of a man who'd stared down worse than boardroom sharks. "She gave us a reason to start the day right, a quiet promise in every pore. Now they're circling her like vultures, twisting codes and laws to claim what's hers. We ride for truth, brothers and sisters. Tomorrow we dig." The plan unfolded in hushed tones. Noah would tap old contacts at the county records office, a veteran clerk who'd owed the club since a roadside rescue years back. Lucas would lead a subtle watch on the developers' movements, bikes blending into the night like ghosts. Sarah volunteered to stay close to Grace, her nurse's eye spotting signs of strain before they broke. It wasn't vengeance. It was justice, poetic and unyielding, the kind that honored the overlooked oaths of a cynical world. Dawn crept in, reluctant, painting the eastern sky in muted greys and golds, the first light filtering through the warehouse windows like hesitant fingers. Hawk revved his Harley to life, the engine's growl a wake-up call that stirred the camp. The convoy formed tighter than before, a steel serpent winding through the waking town, past sleepy diners and fog-shrouded fields. The air nipped crisp, carrying the scent of dew-soaked earth and distant rain, a prelude to the gathering clouds. They reached Grace's just as the sun breached the hills, its rays glancing off the reinforced roof like approval from above. She was already on the porch, pot in hand, her silver-streaked hair catching the light, a faint weariness in her posture from the restless night. "Morning," she called, her voice steady despite the shadows under her eyes, pouring the first mugs with hands that no longer trembled. Hawk dismounted, helmet under his arm, the club's presence a bulwark against the horizon. "Slept any?" he asked, taking the coffee, the warmth seeping through the ceramic like a shared secret. Grace shook her head, glancing toward the scrubland where the scout had prowled. Heard engines circling till late. Left another note, something about inspections. Her words hung in the air, laced with the quiet fear of a woman who'd lost enough. Hawk's jaw tightened, but his response was calm, an anchor in the rising tide. "Won't be alone in this. We're turning the tables today." As the riders fueled up, activity buzzed. Tires checked, tools unpacked for ongoing fortification, the metallic clink of wrenches punctuating the morning chorus of birds. By mid-morning, the first threads of their plan unraveled secrets. Noah returned from town, dust-caked bike parked at the fence, a folder of copied documents clutched under his arm. "Found it," he said, spreading papers on Grace's porch table. The breeze rustling them like impatient whispers. Buried records showed the developer's firm had a history. Shady deals with officials, land grabs disguised as progress, all under the guise of community benefit. One name stood out, a councilman with ties to the club from darker days, a man who'd turned his back on old loyalties for a suit and a salary. Grace leaned in, her eyes scanning the lines, a spark of indignation igniting. "They can't just erase people like this," she murmured, the coffee forgotten as resolve hardened her features. Tension thickened as noon approached, the sun beating down with unrelenting clarity, turning the yard into a stage for confrontation. The black SUV returned, this time with two men, the sharp-faced driver and a taller figure in an ill-fitting blazer, clipboard replaced by a briefcase. They parked at the gate, engines idling like a threat. Hawk stepped forward, the club arrayed behind him, a living barrier of leather and steel. "State your business," Hawk said, voice even, eyes locked on the newcomers. The taller man smirked, pulling a sheaf of papers. "Official notice, folks. Structural concerns. Your little fix-up doesn't cut it. Sign over the deed, and we'll relocate you properly." Grace emerged from the house, Sarah at her side, the documents from Noah in hand. "I've got proof you're the hazard here," she replied, her tone laced with the steel of morning spent serving strength to strangers. "Your game's end now." The men faltered, exchanging glances as Noah held up the folder, the wind flipping pages to reveal incriminating signatures. Whispers of exposure hung in the air, thicker than the heat. The driver revved the engine, tires spinning gravel in retreat. But not before the taller one spat a warning. "This ain't over. You bikers think you run this town?" Hawk didn't rise to it. Instead, he turned to Grace, a nod sealing the moment. "It will be. We've got more coming." The club pressed on, reinforcing the perimeter with fresh stakes and wire, their work a symphony of purpose, the thud of mallets, the creak of bending metal, laughter defying the shadows. As afternoon waned, the sky darkened with approaching clouds, thunder rumbling like distant engines. Inside, Grace shared stories over a simple lunch, fragments of her life with Tom, the promises they'd made under starlit skies, the quiet sacrifices that built their world. Hawk listened, his own losses echoing in the spaces between words, the chosen family around the table, a testament to redemption's slow burn. Outside, Lucas spotted another vehicle on the ridge, a sign the fight was far from won. But in that fragile peace, bonds deepened, honor standing tall against the storm. The day closed with the riders lingering, engines low as twilight bled into the land. Hawk clasped Grace's hand, the gesture heavy with unspoken vows. "We ride together now." She nodded, the porch light flickering on, a beacon in the gathering dusk. As the convoy thundered away, the clouds broke, rain pattering like applause, washing clean the path ahead. But in the distance, headlights flickered, opposition rallying, the moral clash building to a crescendo. Rain lashed against the windows of Grace Harlan's home that night, a relentless drumbeat that mirrored the storm brewing in her heart. The drops traced erratic paths down the glass, blurring the world outside into a watercolor of shadows and silver streaks. Inside, the kitchen felt smaller, more fortified, with the scent of fresh rain mingling with the ever-present coffee aroma, a brew she'd set to percolate out of habit, even as sleep eluded her. Grace sat at the table, the documents from Noah spread before her like a map to buried truths, her fingers absently stirring a cold mug. The confrontation earlier had left a residue of adrenaline, sharp and lingering, but beneath it bloomed something warmer. The unshakable presence of the Iron Riders, their loyalty a shield she'd never known she needed. Tom's old pocket watch ticked on the mantel, its rhythm a faint echo of promises kept and broken, reminding her that some bonds outlast the tempests. Across the rain-swept roads, in the Iron Riders' warehouse, the air thrummed with urgency, the downpour hammering the tin roof like impatient fists. Ethan Hawk Riley paced the length of the main room, water dripping from his jacket onto the oil-stained concrete, pooling in dark reflections. The map on the table had grown cluttered, notes scrawled in hasty ink, photos snapped from afar showing the developers' sleek offices and the councilman's smug face at a ribbon-cutting ceremony. Lucas wiped rain from his brow, his massive frame silhouetted against the flickering lantern light, while Noah tinkered with a laptop borrowed from a club ally, its screen casting a blue glow on his focused features. Sarah leaned against a workbench, arms crossed, her eyes scanning the group with the quiet assessment of someone who'd seen fractures heal under pressure. "That retreat today was a feint," she said, her voice cutting through the patter of rain. "They're regrouping. We hit them with facts before they twist the narrative." Hawk stopped pacing, his boots leaving wet prints like footprints in the sand of resolve. The tattoo on his arm seemed to pulse under the damp fabric, a silent vow from days when loyalty meant survival in the unforgiving sands of forgotten wars. He'd lost too much to opportunists like these, men who profited from the cracks in others' lives, much like the shrapnel that had claimed his brother. "We don't wait for their move," Hawk replied, his tone low and steady, carrying the weight of a leader who led not by roar, but by unyielding example. "Noah. What did the clerk dig up?" Noah looked up, his prosthetic leg shifting with a soft creak. "Enough to bury them. Bribes funneled through shell companies, land deals that strong-armed widows like Mama G. The councilman's signatures all over it. Ties back to his campaign funds." Murmurs of agreement swelled, the club a tapestry of scarred souls. Ex-soldiers with eyes that had seen too much. Mechanics whose hands built more than machines, all bound by the code that Grace's daily kindness had unknowingly reinforced. As the storm raged on, the plans solidified in the warehouse's humid glow. Subtle rides to gather witness statements from townsfolk weary of the developer's grip, anonymous tips to a journalist friend of Sarah's who'd exposed corruption before. It wasn't about confrontation in the streets. It was poetic justice, truths unearthed like roots from parched soil, forcing the light on shadows that thrived in secrecy. Hawk clasped Lucas's shoulder, the gesture a bridge across old wounds. "We ride at first light, for her, for all the promises we carry." The group dispersed into the night, engines coughing to life under the eaves, headlights cutting through the sheets of rain like beacons of intent. Hawk lingered last, staring into the storm, the wind whipping his hair as thunder rolled, a symphony that promised retribution not in violence, but in the quiet power of standing true. Dawn arrived shrouded in mist, the rain tapering to a fine drizzle that beaded on leaves and leather alike, turning the world into a glistening veil. Grace rose with the light, her movements deliberate, the house's new solidity a comfort against the chill. She filled the pot, the steam rising like a morning prayer, and stepped onto the porch, the wooden boards creaking softly under her weight. The air smelled of wet earth and renewal. The scrubland beyond her yard emerging from the haze like a stage set for the next act. Distant engines growled, growing louder, and soon the Iron Riders crested the rise, a convoy of determination. Bikes slick with moisture, riders' faces set against the grey. Hawk pulled up front, dismounting with a nod, his helmet tucked away as he accepted the first mug. The coffee's heat cut through the damp, steam curling between them like shared secrets. "Storm passed," he said, eyes scanning the horizon where clouds lingered like reluctant foes. Grace met his gaze, the documents tucked under her arm. But the fight's just starting. I want in. This is my home, my word." Her voice held a newfound edge, the widow's quiet strength blooming into alliance. As the club gathered, mugs in hand, Noah briefed them on the overnight leads. A farmer who'd lost acreage to similar tactics, a clerk ready to testify. Sarah checked Grace's posture, a nurse's instinct, ensuring the weight didn't crush her spirit. Mid-morning brought the rumble of opposition, a fleet of vehicles this time, 3 SUVs grinding up the gravel road, their tires churning mud into protest. The lead car halted at the gate, doors opening to reveal the sharp-faced driver, the blazer-clad enforcer, and a new face. The councilman himself, paunchy and polished, umbrella shielding his suit from the drizzle. Hawk stepped forward, the riders forming a loose arc behind him, their presence a wall of silent thunder. "We've got company," Lucas muttered, hand resting on his handlebars, ready but restrained. The councilman approached, papers flapping in the wind, his smile oily as spilled fuel. "Mrs. Harlan, this charade ends. Your repairs violate zoning. Public safety demands relocation. Sign and we'll compensate fairly." Grace emerged, folder in hand, Sarah at her elbow. "Fair, like the deals you've buried?" she countered, voice carrying clear, the mist swirling around her like allies. Noah held up his phone, recording the exchange, while whispers from the club relayed details to their journalist contact in real time. The councilman's eyes darted, confidence cracking like thin ice. "You bikers are out of your depth, interfering in official matters." Hawk's response was measured, eyes locked like crosshairs. "We're standing for what's right. Your papers don't hide the truth anymore." Tension hung thick, the drizzle pattering on leather, and lies alike, until the councilman signaled retreat, vehicles peeling away in a spray of gravel. But victory tasted tentative. A tail light lingered on the ridge, watching. The afternoon unfolded in purposeful motion, the club fortifying not just the land, but the case, riders splitting into pairs to collect affidavits from shadowed doorsteps. Grace joined Sarah in poring over maps inside, her home a command center, humming with low voices and the scent of reheated coffee. Stories surfaced amid the work. Hawk sharing fragments of his brother's last ride, a promise to watch each other's backs that echoed in every turn of the wheel. Lucas hammered stakes into the softening earth, each blow a punctuation to their oath. By dusk, the mist lifted, revealing a sky bruised but clearing, the first stars winking like distant witnesses. As engines idled for departure, Hawk turned to Grace, raindrops still clinging to his beard. "This promise rides deeper now. We're family in the fight." She nodded, the weight shared, her hand brushing his in gratitude. The convoy thundered off, leaving the yard echoing with purpose. But in the fading light, a single envelope slipped under the door. A final threat scrawled in haste. Grace picked it up, resolve hardening. The storm had passed, but the true tempest loomed, demanding every ounce of their chosen loyalty. If this chapter stirred something in you, smash that like button. It helps spread these stories of quiet courage far and wide. The envelope lay unopened on Grace Harlan's kitchen table, its edges curling slightly from the damp night air that had seeped through the cracks. Moonlight filtered through the rain-streaked windows, casting elongated shadows that danced like uneasy spectres across the worn wood. Grace's fingers hovered over the paper, the faint scent of ink and threat mingling with the cooling coffee pot on the counter, a brew left untouched since the rider's departure. Her heart, steadied by the day's alliances, now thudded with a familiar isolation, the kind that whispered of losses too deep to voice. Tom's watch ticked onward from the mantel, its steady rhythm a counterpoint to the storm's fading growl outside. She slit the seal with a butter knife, the words inside stark and bold. "Last chance. Walk away, or we bury you in red tape. No signature, just the weight of institutional shadows closing in. Grace folded it away, resolve hardening like the beams the Iron Riders had nailed into place. This wasn't just her fight anymore. It was a promise, echoing through the night, calling her chosen family back to the fray. In the Iron Riders' warehouse, the rain had eased to a persistent drip from the eaves, pooling in shallow craters on the gravel lot outside. Ethan Hawk Riley sat on a stool by the workbench, the map before him now a battlefield of circled names and arrowed paths, illuminated by a single desk lamp that buzzed like a distant hornet. The air carried the sharp tang of wet leather and machine oil, a scent that grounded him amid the swirl of strategies taking shape. Lucas slumped against a stack of crates, nursing a mug of instant coffee that paled in comparison to Grace's. His broad face etched with the fatigue of vigilance. Noah hunched over the laptop, fingers flying across keys, pulling threads from digital archives, emails, transaction logs, the digital ghosts of corruption. Sarah paced nearby, her boots scuffing the concrete, the nurse in her attuned to the rising tension coiling in the room like smoke. "That envelopes their desperation," she said, voice low and assured, glancing at Hawk. "They're cornered, but cornered animals bite hardest." Hawk nodded, his scarred knuckles whitening as he gripped the table's edge. The tattoo on his forearm, a stark outline of wings folded in eternal watch, seemed to tighten with his grip, a relic from the day he'd sworn to his brother under a merciless sun, protect the line, no matter the cost. Those sands had taught him that true threats hid in the paperwork, not the barrels, and this felt achingly similar. The developers weren't just after land. They were eroding the quiet honors that held communities together, the same way bureaucracy had buried his brother's service under redacted files. "We expose the root," Hawk murmured, his words cutting through the drip-drip of the roof like a blade. "Councilman's the key. His ties run deep, but so do ours. Noah, you got the journalist looped in." Noah looked up, eyes bright with the thrill of the hunt. "She's drafting the piece now. Hits the wires at dawn if we feed her the final nail, those bribe records tied to his re-election fund." The club stirred around them, riders filtering back from night watches, their faces shadowed but spirits unbowed. Whispers wove through the group. A farmer's testimony secured at the edge of town. A clerk's reluctant nod over a shared cigarette. This wasn't chaos, it was orchestrated redemption, each piece a step toward poetic justice, the kind that dismantled empires with truth rather than fists. Hawk rose, his presence drawing the circle tighter, voices falling to a hush. Mama G's coffee wasn't just fuel. It was a daily oath, reminding us what's worth riding for. We don't let suits rewrite that. At first light, we deliver the package, irrefutable, straight to the press and the right ears. Affirmations rippled out, fists bumping in quiet solidarity, the chosen family igniting like embers fanned to flame. Sarah squeezed Hawk's shoulder, her touch a silent anchor, while Lucas cracked his knuckles, the sound echoing like loading chambers. Outside, the rain ceased, leaving a profound silence broken only by the first tentative chirps of night creatures reclaiming the dark. Dawn broke with a clarity that belied the night's turmoil. The sky a vast canvas of pale blue streaked with lingering clouds, the sun's first rays gilding the dew on Grace's porch rails. She stood there as always, pot in hand, the steam rising in lazy spirals that caught the light like fragile promises. The house breathed easier now, walls unyielding, roof a steadfast crown, but her eyes held the glint of battle, the envelope's words fueling rather than fraying her spirit. Engines approached, a familiar thunder building from the mist-shrouded road, and the Iron Riders crested the rise in tight formation, bikes gleaming wetly under the emerging sun. Hawk led, dismounting with purposeful grace, his helmet revealing wind-rumpled hair and eyes sharp with intent. "Coffee first," he said, accepting the mug, the ceramic's warmth a bridge across the morning chill. Grace poured steadily, her smile a quiet weapon. Heard the rain all night. Dreams or plans keeping you up? Their exchange was brief, laced with the shorthand of trust earned in labor and loyalty. As the club gathered, mugs clutched against the crisp air, Noah unpacked the dossier, pages crisp and damning, the scent of fresh print mingling with the coffee's richness. "This goes public today," he explained, voice steady as he outlined the drops, copies to the local paper, a trusted judge with veteran roots. Even a state investigator Sarah had flagged from her hospital days. Grace traced a finger over the councilman's name, indignation blooming in her chest like the first wildflowers after a storm. He shook Tom's hand at the VFW once, talked big about honoring service. This is the betrayal. Hawk met her gaze, the horizon framing them both. We honor it now, for him, for all of us. Mid-morning brought the air to life with motion, the riders splitting tasks with the precision of a well-oiled engine. Lucas and a few others reinforced the gate with heavy chain and locks, the metallic clangs ringing out like declarations. Noah and Sarah ferried documents into town on side-by-sides, their paths weaving through back roads to evade prying eyes. Hawk stayed with Grace, walking the property line, boots sinking into the soft earth, the scent of damp soil and pine rising around them. Stories unfurled in the pauses, his brother's last letter tucked in a saddlebag, promising a reunion that war stole. Grace's whispers of Tom's quiet vows under the same stars. "You rebuilt more than walls," she said, pausing by the fence, the sun warming her face. "You gave me back the fight." Hawk's response was a nod, profound in its silence, the bond between them a thread in the larger tapestry of redemption. By noon, ripples spread, the journalist's article breaking online, headlines screaming of graft and greed, the councilman's name splashed in digital ink, phones buzzed in the club's pockets, confirmations from allies, the judge reviewing files, whispers in City Hall turning to shouts. Tension peaked as a lone sedan approached the road's end. Not aggressive but hesitant, the sharp-faced driver emerging alone, hands raised in empty placation. "Terms?" he called, voice carrying on the breeze, the club's watchful eyes upon him. Hawk stepped forward, dossier in hand. "Walk away clean or the full weight falls." And the man glanced at the papers, then the unyielding faces, defeat etching his features like cracks in facade. He retreated without a word, the sedan vanishing in a plume of dust, the first fracture in the opposition's armor. Afternoon light slanted golden across the yard, the work shifting to celebration's edge, riders sharing a meal on the porch, laughter punctuating tales of roads less traveled. Grace refilled mugs, her movements lighter, the house a haven pulsing with shared purpose. Yet vigilance lingered. Scouts reported vehicles massing at the developer's office, a final stand brewing. Hawk gathered the core group under the oak, maps refolded, but minds sharp. "One more push," he said, voice resonant with the moral fire that had carried them this far. "We stand, they fold." Grace overheard joining them, her presence a quiet force. Bonds deepened in the golden hour, honor's legacy etching deeper, the family chosen proving unbreakable against the tide. As dusk crept in, painting the sky in hues of amber and indigo, engines idled low, the convoy preparing to ride. Hawk clasped Grace's hand, the gesture laden with vows unspoken. "This promise holds till the end." She nodded, the envelope's threat now ash in her mind's eye. The thunder faded into twilight, leaving the home aglow, but in the distance, a convoy of lights gathered, not retreat, but reckoning. The moral storm crested, justice's blade poised to fall. The twilight deepened over Willow Creek, the sky a bruised tapestry of indigo and fading gold, where the first stars pierced through like hesitant allies. Grace Harlan stood on her porch, the wooden planks solid beneath her feet, the air still heavy with the scent of rain-soaked earth and distant pine. The envelope's threat, now reduced to a crumpled relic in the trash, felt like a ghost exorcised by the day's revelations. But the gathering lights on the ridge, headlights flickering like predatory eyes, signaled the opposition's final gambit. Her hand tightened on the porch rail, the cool metal grounding her, as the low rumble of engines stirred the night. Not the Iron Rider's thunder, but something colder, more mechanical, the developers' reinforcements, SUVs and sedans massing like a siege line, their beams cutting swathes through the gathering dusk. In the Iron Rider's warehouse, the call came like a flare in the dark. Lucas's phone buzzing with urgent words from a scout perched on the outskirts. Ethan Hawk Riley was already moving, shrugging into his jacket, the leather creaking like old bones awakening. The room, still humid from the storm, crackled with purpose. Tools clattered as riders grabbed helmets and keys, the air thick with the sharp bite of adrenaline and engine primer. Noah slammed his laptop shut, the dossier's digital copies already disseminated like seeds of truth across networks that spanned beyond the town's edges. Sarah checked her gear, her face a mask of calm resolve, the nurse's steady hand now gripping handlebars instead of scalpels. "They're coming for a show," Lucas growled, revving his bike to life under the warehouse's gaping doors, the exhaust blooming in the cool evening air. Hawk mounted up, his Harley's growl a counterpoint to the encroaching lights. "We meet them on our terms. Truth first, always." The convoy surged out, a serpent of chrome and shadow, headlights piercing the twilight as they raced toward Grace's, the wind whipping promises into the night. Grace heard them before she saw them, the dual symphonies clashing, the developer's convoy grinding up the gravel road, tires crunching like brittle bones, and the Iron Rider's thunder answering from the opposite horizon, a roar that shook the ground and set her heart ablaze. She stepped into the yard, the porch light casting her silhouette long and unyielding, the coffee pot left behind as a symbol of mornings reclaimed. The lead SUV halted at the gate, doors flinging open to disgorge the councilman, his face flushed under the harsh beams, flanked by the sharp-faced driver and a cluster of suited enforcers, clipboards and badges glinting like false talismans. "This ends tonight, Mrs. Harlan," the councilman barked, his voice oily over the idling engines, rain-fresh mud splattering his polished shoes. "Your biker friends can't stop progress. Sign the deed, or we'll have you removed, legally, permanently." His words hung in the charged air, laced with the arrogance of men who mistook paper for power. But the night fractured with the arrival of the Iron Riders. E-bikes skidding to a halt in a wall of steel and loyalty, engines cutting off in unison to leave a profound silence, broken only by the tick of cooling metal. Hawk dismounted first, striding forward with measured steps, the club fanning out behind him, Noah with his phone raised, recording every flicker, Lucas a towering sentinel at his side, Sarah positioning herself near Grace, a quiet bulwark. The developers faltered, their convoy's lights dimming in the face of this unexpected tide, the air humming with the scent of hot exhaust and unspoken stakes. Hawk's voice cut through, steady as the stars emerging overhead. "Progress? You mean greed dressed in suits? We've got the records, your bribes, your backroom deals. The press has them, the judge has them. This land stays hers." He tossed the physical dossier at the councilman's feet, pages scattering like fallen leaves in the breeze, each one a nail in the coffin of corruption. The councilman's eyes darted, sweat beading on his brow despite the chill, his enforcers shifting uneasily as Noah's phone captured the unraveling. Grace stepped forward, her voice clear and resonant, carrying the weight of years spent pouring strength into strangers. "You took from others, widows, veterans, folks like my Tom who built this town with calloused hands. But you won't take this. Not while promises hold." Murmurs rippled through the Iron Riders, a chorus of quiet affirmation. their presence a living testament to chosen family, the ex-soldiers who'd traded uniforms for leathers, the healers and builders who'd found purpose in the roar of the road. The sharp-faced driver lunged for the papers, but Lucas's hand shot out, not striking but halting, a wall of restraint that spoke louder than violence. Tension coiled, the night holding its breath, until the councilman raised his hands, defeat etching deep lines into his face. This is a mistake. We'll fight it in court. But his words rang hollow, the distant wail of sirens, summoned by the journalist's tip, heralding the arrival of real authority, lights flashing blue and red like justice's dawn. The developers scattered then, vehicles reversing in a chaotic spray of gravel, taillights fleeing into the dark like rooted shadows. Hawk turned to Grace, the club's circle closing around her, the air now scented with relief and the faint grounding aroma of cooling engines. "It's over," he said, his tone laced with the quiet triumph of oaths fulfilled. She nodded, tears tracing silver paths down her cheeks, not of sorrow but release. The house behind her a beacon, rebuilt not just in wood but in the unyielding bonds of loyalty. The riders lingered in the aftermath, sharing nods and low words under the stars, stories weaving like threads, Hawk's brother watching from some eternal road, Tom's spirit in every beam they'd nailed. Sarah embraced Grace, the gesture warm against the night's chill, while Noah pocketed his phone, the evidence secured for the trials to come. As the sirens faded, confirming arrests in the distance, the councilman cuffed under floodlights, his empire crumbling in whispers, the group mounted up once more, engines purring low in farewell. Hawk paused at the gate, helmet in hand, the moonlight catching the resolve in his eyes. Every morning, Mama G, coffee and all. She waved them off, the convoy's thunder receding into the vast night, leaving her yard bathed in peace, the scrubland whispering approval. Inside, Grace poured a final cup, the steam rising like a vow kept, the watch on the mantel ticking toward a new dawn. The promise had ridden through the storm, emerging stronger, redemption not in grand gestures, but in the quiet honor of standing for one another. Willow Creek slept under the stars, its overlooked heart beating steady, a legacy of family chosen and justice won. Thank you for riding along on this journey of loyalty and quiet courage. If these stories of redemption and unbreakable promises resonate with you, please subscribe for more tales that honor the human spirit. Your support keeps the thunder rolling.